As much as the Switch is heating things up in the modern gaming era, its grandfather the Wii had quite a run of its own with over 100 million consoles sold. And it's hard to deny that this accomplishment's
pretty good.
And you'd think Nintendo would be so proud of their little guy that they'd constantly put bumper stickers on their car to remind everybody. But the truth is that while the Wii overachieved more than anybody ever thought it could, there are a few dark secrets that N-Dog wants to sweep under the rug. Before I tell you what those are though, I've got to clarify that I'm not going to pick on the Wii just because I want to. I personally loved the dang thing, and I even paid $5 just for a chance to pre-order it. But even though the Wii and I go way back, I just can't help but be a butt pirate. So have a seat, drink some non-alcoholic horse beer, consciously choose not to pay any of your bills, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the Big Valboski Cameron, to tell you 10 things Nintendo wants you to forget about the Wii. Number 10. Wii damage. The main reason why the Wii was so successful in the casual market was thanks to the motion controls. Because instead of getting your calcium deficient ass out of the house, the Wii let you get tennis elbow from the discomfort of your living room, which apparently was actually a thing that happened to a few people. But the Wii damage I was referring to had less to do with people's limbs and what they got stuck in their BUT, and more to do with the countless TVs that were broken because nobody could hold onto their Wii remotes when swinging them. I'm really not sure why this was so common, since I don't think very many people let go of tennis rackets in real life. That is with the exception of my tennis instructor, of course, who understandably disciplines me after losing a scrimmage, though. Regardless of how people letting go of their Wii remote was even common in the first place, Nintendo foresaw this problem and put warnings in the beginning of every game to encourage players to wear the wrist strap. But apparently people were swinging the controller so hard that when they did let go, the strap couldn't handle it, causing Nintendo to replace Wii remotes with straps that could handle people being a little too much. To be fair, it's really not Nintendo's fault that so many people had a poor grip and thought about their fathers while swinging the controller, but you could still imagine that with there being so many websites dedicated to damage done by the Wii, that this will always be a soft spot for Nintendo. And to make matters even more ridiculous, Number 9. Early motion controls were inaccurate. Sure, it was pretty cool to swing your Wii remote like a baseball bat to practice debt collecting, but how you swung it didn't really matter all that much since swinging the Wii remote essentially acted as a button press. And Nintendo, along with third parties, were just kinda hoping you do the correct motions while assuming it mattered how you were swinging. This problem was most obvious with the launch title Twilight Princess that was originally made for the GameCube. Videos from E3 of people playing the Wii version of this game suckered people into thinking that swinging your sword would actually be precise. But the reality ended up being that it didn't matter how you swung your Wii remote whatsoever, because any sudden motions that were made were essentially just substituting the A button. And it wasn't until Skyward Sword came out years later where it actually mattered how you wielded the Wii remote. Although, one thing about Twilight Princess's controls that were actually better than Skyward Sword was using the pointer for the bow and arrow rather than the primitive gyro controls in the Wii Motion Plus, because having to recalibrate the remote every time you farted got old pretty quick. Which brings us to Number 8. The pointer controls were abandoned. The Wii got a lot of crap for forcing its control methods into games that didn't need it, and if I'm being honest, I can't say that criticism's unfair, but I will fight to the death defending the pointer controls, because I think having them as an option improved any games that involved aiming. Sure, the sensor bar cord was unnecessarily long and always got tangled up, but aiming the Wii remote at the screen's just way more accurate than any gyroscopic controls I've ever used. Even if you disagree with that though, it's still kinda weird for Nintendo to essentially take a controller feature away in the next generation. And despite the Joy-Cons improving pretty much everything about the Wii remotes, pointer controls have been abandoned entirely for the more convenient but less accurate gyro controls, which would be like the Nintendo 64 not having L and R buttons or the GameCube not having an analog stick. I just think it's kinda weird to get rid of something, and given that Nintendo's always prided themselves on making innovations for the future, it's probably not ideal for them that I'm talking about something they decided to leave in the past. Number 7. The iLife patent lawsuits. Every single time Nintendo creates a non-conventional product of any sort, there always seem to be people coming out of the woodworks claiming their ideas were stolen, and the Wii's no exception. In 2013, a Texas-based company called iLife filed a patent infringement lawsuit against Nintendo. Apparently, they felt the motion controls in the Wii remote felt an ass or two similar to the medical monitors, which were meant to automatically call an ambulance for old people if they fell down. But unlike most of Nintendo's other lawsuits, iLife was actually able to win $10 million from them in 2017. And the same company had a similar lawsuit with Fitbit that settled out of court. But Nintendo's never been one to lie down in a legal battle, and they've already appealed to get out of this pickle. Even if Nintendo successfully manages to get the iLife thorn out of their asses once and for all, though, this headache still cost them a lot of time, money, and effort that could have been better spent elsewhere. Number 6. The Shovelware. Part of Nintendo's strategy to revive the video game industry in North America after the big crash in 1983 was to limit how many games a developer could release on the NES. That way, if you decided to pick up a random game at the store, the chances of it being good were much higher than they were with the Atari 2600. But then after 2 console generations of third parties not wanting to be seen with them at the Youth Chili Cook-Off, N-Dog decided to be a little more lenient with the Wii, which ultimately led to anybody and everybody who could make a video game of any kind pumping something out onto the Wii. This led to a library of over 1,500 games, which might sound great to have options, but when only a small percentage of those games are actually good, it definitely poses a huge problem. Because while a higher quantity of games might have led to more money in the short term, all the good games buried in a graveyard full of bad ones just made them that much harder to discover, even with the internet helping people make educated choices with reviews. Currently, the Switch is having a much worse problem with this on the eShop, but ultimately, this blame falls on the Wii for starting this trend. And it's actually kind of ironic that Nintendo letting publishers run wild on the Wii was meant to help third parties because... Number 5. Third-party games sold terribly. After the 64 and GameCube repelled third parties away harder than I did with all my friends, Nintendo was finally able to get them all back since the Wii was selling so well that publishers didn't really have a choice but to support it. But aside from rhythm games and a few other exceptions, most third-party games never caught fire on the Wii. Most of this had to do with the fact that multiplats on the Wii sucked often enough that nobody even wanted to give third-party games a chance at all, even though some of them did have effort put into them, which was unfortunate because there were some pretty good exclusives as well as some decent multiplats I could overlook. But aside from SmackDown vs. Raw letting you do suck-its with motion controls, the Wii versions of games were usually just watered-down garbage meant to make a quick buck off the console's popularity. So your best bet was usually to just steer clear from anything on the Wii that wasn't made by Nintendo themselves. Number 4. Nobody cared about the channels. In the Wii's attempt to appeal to the casual market and be more than just a video game console, it tried offering various different channels in the home menus for news and weather, as well as some silly stuff like voting on random topics. Sounds pretty useless in 2019, where these kinds of things are just easier and more convenient to do on your phone. But in 2006, I actually thought this was kinda cool. Unfortunately, seeing as how Nintendo didn't even wait for the Wii to die to discontinue these altogether, I'd say it's safe to say that only a handful of other people liked it. Oddly enough, that small handful of people were hackers who wanted to keep the Everybody Votes channel alive with Reconnect 24. And speaking of hacking... Number 3. It was easy to hack. I hate putting this one on every one of these lists, I really do. Cause believe me, I'd much rather make fun of the Wii for its controllers needing batteries. But Nintendo's about as good at preventing hacking as my dad is from preventing me from taking candy from strangers. Doesn't matter what either of them do, it's just something that's gonna happen. N-Dog invented the Virtual Console in the hopes that they could make some easy money off their library of classic games, which did end up working to an extent thanks to people like me, but as if computer emulation wasn't enough of an incentive to avoid paying for classic games, hacking your Wii to play just about every retro game that was ever made was relatively easy to do. So not only could people avoid paying for games that they'd later not be able to transfer to future consoles, but they could also play games Nintendo wasn't legally allowed to sell due to licensing issues, which surely cut into Nintendo's profits a good bit and made them look like a bunch of dinguses for being incapable of preventing this. Number 2. Its final years were painful. The Wii's launch lineup wasn't the best ever, but overall, I thought the first year of the console's life had some pretty decent games. After all, it did consistently sell out for a few years, and the install base ended up being over 100 million. But around 2010, the software sales took a mortal blow, and it just kept on bleeding more and more each year. This happened because the novelty of the motion controls had completely worn off, which caused the casual market to just play mobile games instead that were exploding in popularity at the time. Meanwhile, the average gamer just wanted to use a traditional controller and not have to deal with hardware limitations. And speaking of hardware limitations, among other things... Number 1. It was never fully respected by core gamers.
My whole life, I don't get no respect.
I always say that graphics don't matter as much as they used to, but this was the final era where they did make a huge difference. Because as I mentioned earlier, games on the PS3 and Xbox 360 were always way better than they were on the Wii. And it's not just because they looked better, it's because there were just way more possibilities as to what you could do with a game. And due to the Wii's limitations, it was often considered the laughingstock of gaming. But what really sealed the deal was Nintendo's large focus on the casual market that ultimately abandoned them in the end anyway. After all, that is kind of the casual market's thing. It'd be like inviting that snake-in-the-grass rat bastard Ryan Statlander to your Christmas party a few years ago and get mad at him when he sleeps with your ex-wife Chili. Many would say it serves Nintendo right for ignoring the core fan base to cater to the casual market, but to be fair, it is possible that a lot of gamers that are around today were reeled in by the Wii. But even though the Wii managed to create a few new gamers, the same could be said about bikes with training wheels getting people into riding bikes. But aside from my neighbor Terry, who lost most of his motor functions when his mysterious chemistry lab exploded, nobody uses training wheels anymore. And while I agree that even some of Nintendo's first-party Wii games don't really deserve respect, it is kind of a shame that for the longest time you'd get beaten up for having nice things to say about the amazing games that the console offered. Because even with all the games that don't hold up at all, I still don't think the Wii was Nintendo's worst console. Thankfully, people are looking at the Wii more fondly in 2019 by asking for so many HD remakes. even though it's not likely to happen, seeing as how the Wii Remote isn't exactly the same thing as the Joy-Cons. But I talk about that more in another video that I'll pin in the comments. But I'll tell you two people who deserve HD remakes on the Switch more than anything on the Wii are today's patrons of the day, Justin D and Travis Denton. Or if you'd rather show support by picking a shirt or mug up, then send pictures of videos of you rocking it to make a cameo like these badasses right here. Anyway, do you know of any dark secrets on the Wii that I missed? Or do you think I'm just being a weenie for bringing this up in the first place? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to see more videos like this. And if you want to help this channel grow, then simply liking and sharing goes a long way. My name's Cameron, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.